I've always been a quiet man. In a town where everybody waves and gossips on front porches, I've been the guy who nods politely and keeps to himself. That reserved nature turned into an asset when I started suspecting my wife was cheating on me. I didn't fly off the handle or confront her in a tearful outburst. Instead, I watched. I listened. I collected the small oddities in her behavior like puzzle pieces, locking them away in a mental drawer with cool patience. The first piece was trivial, a text message preview I glimpsed over her shoulder one summer evening. It flashed briefly on her phone as we sat on the couch. "Can't wait for the party?" It read. She quickly tilted the screen away, pretending to check a notification about work. I said nothing. In our sleepy provincial town, party isn't a word that comes up often. Our social life revolves around Sunday barbecues and the occasional church picnic. A party, complete with a winking emoji, felt as out of place as a tuxedo at the farmer's market. My mind latched onto that word. In the following days, I noticed more anomalies. She giggled over text messages that she tried to hide, claiming, "Just a funny meme from a friend." Her Saturday yoga sessions stretched longer than usual, and she'd return home flushed and scented with a cologne that certainly wasn't hers or mine. Again, I held my tongue, offering only a mild, "How was yoga?" with a half smile. Her responses were overly casual. "Great, lots of stretching," delivered with the enthusiasm of a bad actress sticking to a script. I nodded and hummed, playing the part of the oblivious husband. Inside, a quiet storm brewed. Late at night, I'd lie awake with a stiff back and clenched jaw while she slept soundly beside me, or pretended to. The glow of my phone screen was my only company as I started researching what a man in my position could do. I refused to be the cliché, clueless spouse. If something was going on, I would find out on my terms and with evidence. I wasn't going to lose my cool or tip my hand too early. No, I intended to remain legally and emotionally in control every step of the way. My research became a strange comfort. I learned I wasn't alone. Technology has made cheating both easier and riskier. I discovered how modern betrayal often leaves a digital trail. Deleted texts aren't really gone. Browsers remember more than we think. And sometimes, smart home gadgets, those innocuous little devices, can become eyes and ears. One article noted how long-running voice-activated digital recording devices are readily available, sold even in mainstream stores, and can be easily hidden. These weren't Bond movie fantasies. They were consumer gadgets that any determined spouse could use. Reading that, I felt a cold, sharp clarity. I had found my way. Each clue she unwittingly gave me only steeled my resolve. When she'd mention a new coworker's name too often or laugh at jokes she wouldn't explain, I'd mentally file it away. When I noticed our joint bank account showed a receipt for a moonlight motel in the next town, she concocted a story about booking a spa day for us that she later canceled. I didn't buy it, but I feigned a yawn and let it drop as if I were too drowsy to care. In truth, my heart was pounding. That transaction was a glaring puzzle piece sliding right into place. By now, I was fairly sure of it. My wife was having an affair. But suspecting and proving are two different things. In a small community, accusations fly easily, but I wanted undeniable proof. Not for confrontation, I could manage that in private, but for what might come after. I began thinking about the long game. Divorce, a word that thudded in my mind like a weight. If this marriage was truly broken, I wouldn't let her betrayal clean me out financially or leave me looking like the bad guy. I knew that in some places, if you can prove adultery, the scales of justice tip your way. An innocent spouse might walk away with a bigger share of property, and the cheater could even be denied alimony. Cold comfort, perhaps, but useful leverage. And if she had spent any of our marital funds on her fling, hotel rooms, gifts, what have you, that could further swing a court's sympathies, reducing her share for financial misconduct. I was already thinking like a lawyer, imagining a settlement table where I held all the cards. But first, I needed clear evidence. Hunches and gut feelings wouldn't cut it. So, lying there in the dark, I began to design my smart trap, a modern snare for a modern infidelity. My strategy would be slow-burning and subtle, much like me. No confrontations, no melodrama, just a meticulous collection of truth, followed by a calculated strike when the time was right. Setting the trap. I remember the exact night the plan truly formed. It was late August, one of those thick, humid nights where the air clings to your skin. I sat on our back porch with a lukewarm beer, staring at the soft glow of light from our bedroom window. She was up there, presumably scrolling on her phone or perhaps texting him. The cicadas whined in the trees. My mind, usually so steady, was racing, but with purpose now, not confusion. I had a plan to refine. The key to catching her would be leveraging something already inside our home. Hiring a private investigator to tail her felt too dramatic and expensive. Confronting her lover outright was too risky and crude. But the gadgets in our house, those could be my informants. We owned a couple of smart speakers, one in the living room, one in the bedroom. Sleek little cylinders that responded to our voices for weather updates or to play music. We treated them like part of the furniture. She likely never imagined they could be turned into surveillance tools. The idea was to reprogram the voice assistant, our Google Assistant in this case, to respond not just to its usual wake word, but to a secret trigger word. Something unique enough that normal conversation wouldn't accidentally set it off. And I already had the word party. That word had lodged itself in my brain from the day I saw that flirty text. It was perfect. Innocuous in most homes, but meaningful in our context. If she ever used it again in the privacy of our house, I wanted to know. Of course, Google's device isn't designed to listen for arbitrary custom commands beyond "Hey Google" by default. I had to get creative. Fortunately, I'm handy with tech. By day, I manage inventory for a local farm co-op. Not exactly an IT job, but I tinker with coding and gadgets as a hobby. Over the years, I had, almost embarrassingly, set up our home's smart systems to automate lights and lock doors. This time I would use those skills for something a bit more devious. I dusted off an old Android phone from a drawer and got to work. With some online sleuthing, I found a way to use a third-party app and a bit of code to create a continuous listening service. Essentially, I turned that phone into a custom voice detector attuned to the word party. I placed the phone, plugged in and always on, in our bedroom behind some books on a shelf, hidden in plain sight. If anyone spoke the word party in that room, the phone would detect it and trigger a couple of actions in sequence. First, it would start an audio recording immediately, capturing everything said from that moment until I stopped it remotely. Second, it would send a signal to a small Wi-Fi camera I had purchased and tucked high on our bedroom wardrobe, camouflaged among some decorative knickknacks. This camera was tiny but powerful, motion-activated, night vision capable, and most importantly, I could turn it on and off via a simple network command. The plan was for the voice trigger to switch the camera on to record video whenever party was uttered, ensuring I'd have not just sound but visuals too. I tested the setup extensively while my wife was out. Standing in the bedroom, I muttered "party" under my breath. Instantly, my phone buzzed with a notification confirming that the recording routine had launched. I pulled up the camera feed on my laptop, heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and excitement, and saw our empty bedroom in real time, being recorded from its perch on the wardrobe. It felt eerie watching that live feed of my own room, knowing what I intended to capture there. But it also felt empowering. I was reclaiming control. To make sure this trap would truly capture everything, I added another layer. Our smart home also included a hub that connected our devices. Through some fiddling with IFTTT, the if this then that service, and a custom script, I managed to link the trigger to our home computer as well. The moment party was heard, not only would audio and video recording kick in, but my computer would immediately scan for any active messaging apps or texts on devices synced to our network. My wife's phone often automatically backed up text to the cloud, a feature she likely never thought about. With the right software, I could silently pull down copies of her text messages from that backup, effectively syncing any ongoing text exchange that coincided with the party incident. If she decided to text her lover "come over" or confirm plans right after whispering sweet nothings, I wanted that in black and white. This multi-pronged trap was stretching the limits of what our off-the-shelf gadgets could do, but I was thorough. Late one night, I performed a full dry run. I simulated the scenario by playing a low-volume recording of two people whispering in our room, thanks to some YouTube audio of muffled conversation. I then quietly said "party" a few times amidst the murmurs. The system responded perfectly. Within seconds, it captured audio, video, and even snagged a test text I sent from her phone to mine beforehand. I had borrowed her phone under the guise of installing a security app for our family, which she surprisingly allowed, perhaps relieved I was concerned with security and not suspecting her. Everything synced seamlessly. I was impressed, yes, but also cautious. I knew I was likely crossing some legal lines here. Secretly recording someone in a private setting without their consent. That's dicey territory. Being a calculating man means considering consequences. I'd read up on those too. In many states, intercepting conversations or communications without at least one party's consent is outright illegal. And I certainly didn't have the consent of my wife or her presumed lover to eavesdrop on their rendezvous. I was effectively turning our home into a wiretap zone. If I misstepped, I could be the one in hot water. So I made a decision. This evidence, once obtained, would be for my eyes and ears, only until I chose otherwise. I wouldn't hand over illicit recordings to a court if it came to that. Instead, I'd use them to inform my strategy and perhaps to confront her outside of legal proceedings. I also realized I might not even need the recordings in court if I played my cards right. Often, the mere existence of damning evidence can be a powerful tool to negotiate a favorable divorce settlement, without that evidence ever formally entering the record. I was determined to remain legally clean, or as much as possible, even as I operated in this gray zone. To bolster my position, I also started quietly gathering financial records. If the trap confirmed the affair, I wanted every scrap of related information. I combed through our credit card statements and bank records for any expenses that stood out. Unexplained restaurant charges, hotel bookings, large cash withdrawals on days I remembered she was running errands. If she spent marital funds on her lover, be it a gift or a getaway, I would document it. I knew that could be gold in a divorce negotiation. Courts frown on a cheating spouse using joint money to fund their affair and might compensate the innocent spouse for it. One evening at the kitchen table, I calmly sorted receipts and statements, feeling more like a forensic accountant than a husband. Across from me, my wife folded laundry, utterly unaware that I was cataloging her potential sins in ledger form. With the trap set and my groundwork laid, I had nothing to do but wait. Waiting is its own torture, but I approached it clinically. I established a timeline in my head. I'd give it a couple of months at most. If by then I caught nothing, perhaps I was wrong after all. Or she had grown cautious. But I doubted I was wrong. More likely it was only a matter of time before an opportunity presented itself. Cheaters, I had learned from my late-night research, often slip up eventually. Even the head of the CIA once got caught through an email gaffe, as one article mordantly noted. My wife and her lover were just ordinary people. Odds were they'd slip up too, and when they did, I'd be ready. Biding my time. September rolled in, bringing cooler evenings and the start of football chatter around town. On the surface, life continued as normal. I went to work at the co-op, talked weather with farmers, and came home by 6 p.m. to have dinner with my wife. We discussed the mundane, which neighbor's kid was in trouble at school, whether the grass needed cutting, if we should repaint the guest room. I played the role of the unassuming husband perfectly. In fact, I think I became even more attentive in a low-key way. I didn't want to give her any reason to suspect I knew something. If she smelled suspicion on me, she might clam up or call off her affair, leaving me in limbo. So I made sure to seem content and clueless. Inside, though, I was vigilant. Every evening was an exercise in observation. I'd note what time she stepped out for her yoga or girls' night. I'd casually ask, "What did you do at yoga today?" just to see how quickly she could make up a pose or routine. Her responses were generic enough to raise an eyebrow if I'd been overtly looking for lies. "Oh, the usual stretches and meditation." I'd nod, hiding my irritation at how little effort she put into her deceptions. Part of me wondered if she even cared whether I suspected. But no, I reminded myself she was putting in effort. The secretive texts, the quick showers after coming home, to wash off someone else's scent, I presumed. The enthusiastic over-reporting of minor errands as if to fill conversational space. These were tells, and she had plenty. At night, I often found myself lying awake while she dozed off. Occasionally, her phone would buzz at odd hours. She'd shift, half awake, to glance at it and then settle back. I can't prove it, but I'd bet those were messages from him. I imagined the lover as a faceless entity and decided to keep it that way for now. Obsessing about who he was, some local guy, someone from her work, a traveling salesman, was counterproductive. I'd find out soon enough if my trap worked. Better to focus on when they would slip. I had given some thought to what scenario might finally trigger the trap. The most likely was that she'd try to bring him to our house when I wasn't home. We have a modest house, but it's ours, with a comfortable bedroom. Her and my space. The idea of them desecrating that space filled me with a cold anger, but I set that aside. If it happened, it would ironically make gathering proof easier, since all the equipment was on home turf. Another possibility, maybe she'd have a phone call with him from home and use the word party as code while talking. My trigger was ready for either scenario. To ensure she had the opportunity to hang herself with the rope I'd given, I decided to create a tempting scenario. In early October, I told her I'd be away for a weekend for a regional co-op conference. In truth, there was a conference, but I had no need to attend. Still, I acted excited about it. It's a great networking opportunity, I lied over dinner. I might even tour a new supplier's farm. She perked up just enough for me to notice, the faintest glimmer in her eyes. She tried to mask it by immediately expressing mild disappointment that she'd be home alone, but I could tell the news had set wheels turning in her mind. Home alone. That was likely exactly what she wanted. I offered to help her plan a get-together with her girlfriends while I was away, but she demurred, saying she'd probably just enjoy a quiet weekend in. Her tone was almost too casual. I chewed my casserole slowly and nodded. Inside, my heart thumped with grim anticipation. For added measure, I pretended to leave a day early. I left the house on a Thursday morning with a suitcase, giving her a goodbye kiss that probably felt a tad colder than my usual peck. If she noticed, she didn't show it. Instead of driving out of town, though, I parked my car at a friend's garage across the way. This friend, an older guy named Hank, ran a small engine repair shop and had no interest in anyone's business. I told him I was suspecting my wife of stepping out and that I needed to stash my car. He offered a sympathetic grunt in the far corner of his lot, no questions asked. I spent that Thursday working out of the public library of all places, glued to my laptop and my phone notifications. I felt like a hunter crouched in a blind, poised with a weapon. Except my weapon was my smart trap, armed and ready. Yet, nothing happened on Thursday. I went home late that night, sneaking into my own house like a stranger long after she'd gone to sleep, and hid in the guest room. That's where I'd decided to camp out while officially I was gone. I was confident she wouldn't come in there. We rarely use the room. I felt a little ridiculous, lying on a spare bed in the dark, but it was oddly reminiscent of my childhood when I'd hide in the closet during hide and seek, heart pounding at every sound. Only now I wasn't waiting to be found. I was waiting for someone to incriminate themselves. Friday came and went similarly. I remained scarce, staying mostly in the guest room or slipping out the back door to grab food. We communicated sparingly by text that day. I sent her a few husbandly check-in messages. Hope your day's good. Conference is interesting. Might turn in early tonight? She responded kindly, if briefly, each time. There was no sign of anything unusual yet. I worried that maybe I'd miscalculated. Maybe the first night I was away had been when she'd planned something, and by sneaking back into the house I had unknowingly prevented it. Or perhaps she was saving her rendezvous for Saturday. I had to stay on high alert and above all, not get caught. Sleeping in my own guest room while my wife believed I was out of town was one of the strangest experiences of my life. I heard her moving about the house, humming at times. Once, she even knocked on the guest room door in the early evening, probably to put away laundry or something. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. After a moment, she decided against opening the door, maybe assuming I'd tidied the room up for my trip or something. The narrow escape left me both chuckling and shaking. If she had caught me hiding at home, I'd have had one hell of a time explaining it. But fortune, it seemed, was on my side. Saturday morning, I quietly slipped out again and took up position in a small motel on the edge of town. I needed a real shower and some proper sleep, and I didn't want to tempt fate by staying in the house another full day while she was awake. The motel was a dingy one, but I hardly noticed. My mind was entirely on the trap. I pulled up my phone's interface for the monitoring script. All systems were go. I checked that the camera had ample battery. It did, plus it was plugged into a hidden charger I'd rigged behind the wardrobe. The audio recorder phone was connected and charging. My laptop in the guest room was on and awake, ready to pull data. Now I waited. The trap sprung. It was past 11 p.m. on Saturday when it happened. I was lying on the stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling and debating whether to down another cup of bad coffee, when my phone buzzed. Once, then twice, then a rapid flurry of alerts. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the phone and saw the notifications from my custom app. Voice trigger detected, recording started, camera activated. The trap was sprung. For a second I was frozen. This was it. The moment I had engineered and anticipated for weeks was finally here, and I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong it made my hands tremble. Composing myself, I tapped open the live camera feed on my phone. The motel's weak Wi-Fi struggled with the video for a moment, pixelating the image, but then it cleared. And there it was, my bedroom, in dim light, coming through the lens of the hidden camera. I saw my wife on the bed, sitting at its edge, dressed in what looked like her silk robe. Her posture gave away a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Legs crossed, foot bouncing slightly. She was saying something, but I had muted the feed by reflex, worried the sound might accidentally blare out. I unmuted and pressed the volume low. Her voice, even hushed, was crystal clear. "Should be here soon, yeah." "No, the coast is clear. Party at mine," she was saying with a soft laugh. There, she said it. Party at mine. Hearing her voice utter the trigger phrase, not knowing it was literally triggering a trap, gave me a grim sense of validation. She was on the phone with someone, presumably him. Her tone was affectionately teasing. I've got the wine you like. I'll just get here, silly." My stomach churned, but I forced myself to focus. I needed to capture everything. I double-checked that the recordings were saving properly. A quick glance at my computer's remote interface, accessible through my phone, showed that indeed a file was growing in size, a sign that audio was being recorded continuously. Another window confirmed that data sync was in progress. It was already pulling bits of a text conversation. So they were texting too, or had been. Good. I watched as she ended the call and stood up, checking herself in the mirror. She looked different. Not like the woman in everyday clothes I usually saw at home on weekends. She wore light makeup, her hair was slightly styled. It was a betrayal deeper than just meeting someone on the side. She was preparing to bring him into our home, into our bed, wearing something she hadn't worn for me in a long time. I clenched my phone until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Now is not the time for feelings, I reproached myself. Now was the time to observe and record. I could deal with my emotions later. I had to be like a surveillance camera, impartial, objective, simply recording the facts. So I watched as she lit a couple of candles and dimmed the bedside lamp. The room was enveloped in a soft light that might have seemed romantic to someone else. To me, it seemed like the scene of a crime. About 15 minutes later, the camera in the bedroom showed my wife jumping up at the sound of the doorbell. The sound came faintly from downstairs. She almost ran out of the frame, probably to open the door in her bathrobe and greet her lover. I clenched my teeth. The camera, of course, did not capture the front door, but soon I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, 2 pairs coming up the stairs. Muffled laughter. My wife's voice whispering, "Shh, come here," and a man's voice laughing quietly. They entered the bedroom and came into view. He was a tall man wearing a baseball cap, probably in his early 30s. I recognized him with a dull shock. It was Jake, one of the mechanics from the auto repair shop we often visited. I had chatted with him casually when I brought our car in. A nice guy, I thought. Maybe a little flirtatious, but he flirts with everyone behind the counter. And now he was here, in my house, his hands already on my wife's waist. She closed the door behind them, and he pressed her against it and kissed her greedily. The candles flickered, silhouetting them, making my stomach churn. I pressed record on the live feed, even though I knew it was already recording automatically. Some paranoid part of me wanted to make a manual backup. The next few moments were both painful and vindicating. Painful because I was watching the woman I loved, or once loved, embrace another man. Her fingers running through his hair, his hands wandering freely over her body. I felt searing rage and a sense of loss, and both pulled at me. But it was a relief because here was the truth. No more doubts, no more wondering if I was going crazy. The cold, hard evidence was right in front of me in the form of high-quality video and audio. My trap had worked. They had taken the bait I had given them. At one point, when they moved to the bed, she whispered, "He's gone until Monday. We have the whole night." The absolute certainty in that statement, her confidence that I was no longer in the picture, made me want to laugh and throw my phone against the wall at the same time. I did neither. I just let the scene play out a little longer until I was sure I had everything. Proof of their physical intimacy, their voices, and any identifying details, faces, names if they were spoken. Jake wasn't a particularly cautious person. At one awkward moment, he joked, "Dude, my name has no idea, huh?" Using my name outright while nibbling on her neck. She shushed him playfully but responded, "Stop talking about him. Focus on me." That was enough. I had heard enough. My jaw was so tight I thought my molars might crack. I shut off the live feed, though the devices kept recording in my absence. I didn't need to watch the X-rated portion of my marriage's implosion. I had what I came for. I sank back onto the motel bed, staring at the now blank screen of my phone. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and replaced it with lead. I was furious, yes, but also oddly calm. The confirmation, painful as it was, brought with it a certain peace. The uncertainty was over. Now I could proceed to the next phase. Revenge, executed with the same cold calculation I had applied so far. Before sleeping, or rather attempting to sleep, I made sure the files were safe. I remotely logged into my home computer. The audio file of the evening's encounter was saved, several hours worth, which I'd later trimmed down. The video had been uploaded to a secure cloud drive I controlled, in case anything happened to the physical devices. The synced text messages were also saved. They revealed that earlier in the day, my wife and Jake had been texting to arrange this party. I skimmed the exchange, her telling him what time I'd be gone, him saying he couldn't wait, some nauseating, flirting and emoji usage that made me roll my eyes. One message from her stood out, sent that afternoon. "It's finally happening. Party at mine. Don't forget the wine." That single line encapsulated her betrayal and giddiness about it. I took a screenshot. It might come in handy for what I planned later. I didn't go back home that night. I let them have their romp in my house. It enraged me, but I knew confronting them in the moment might lead to violence or at least a messy scene. And I needed to remain the collected strategist, not a husband scorned barging in with fists swinging. No, there were far more effective ways to handle this. I swallowed my anger like a bitter pill and waited out the night at the motel, my mind spinning scenarios of retribution. They left before dawn, according to the motion alerts I saw in the logs. I wasn't watching live by then. Jake probably didn't want to be spotted by any nosy neighbors come morning. By the time I quietly returned home Sunday afternoon, the house was as she would want it, no trace of his presence. She had washed the sheets, our hamper told that tale, and aired out the bedroom. Candles were back in their spots. When I walked in the door, returning from my trip, she greeted me with a warm, slightly overdone smile and a strong hug, as if she truly missed me. Oscar-worthy performance. I played my part too, smiling tiredly and saying how glad I was to be home. That evening, I sat across from her at dinner, studying her face in the glow of our kitchen light. She looked radiant, actually, as if the affair had invigorated her. She told me a funny story about something on TV, chattering away, perhaps a bit more talkative than usual. Nerves, I guessed. I just nodded and chewed, offering small smiles. Inside, I felt like I was staring at a stranger, or an enemy combatant who had no idea I'd already broken their secret code. Every time she blinked or tucked her hair back, I noticed tiny details. A faint love bite on her neck she tried to cover with makeup, the way her phone was now face down on the table as if she dared not even glance at it. I savored these details quietly. Each one was a reminder of my newfound advantage. I went to bed with her that night, still in act, even managing to fake a gentle goodnight kiss on her forehead. She fell asleep easily. She seemed happily tired. I, on the other hand, lay awake formulating the next moves. Capturing the affair was just step one. Now would come the real art of my revenge, using this knowledge to systematically upend her world while keeping my hands clean and my demeanor cool. Beside me, she slept the sleep of the blissfully ignorant. I stared at the ceiling and allowed myself a thin, unseen smile. Compiling the evidence. In the following days, I transformed into a meticulous curator of betrayal. Every free hour I had, when I was safely alone, went into reviewing and editing the trove of evidence I'd collected. It was like piecing together a dark documentary, one in which I was both director and the unwitting co-star. The raw footage and audio from that Saturday night were explicit and damning, but I didn't want to just drop a pornographic bombshell on our families. No, I needed to be more artful. My goal was maximum impact with a veneer of tastefulness, to expose the affair beyond any doubt, while not turning the reveal into an X-rated spectacle that might overshadow the point, or even get me in trouble for, say, distributing explicit content. So I sat at my computer with headphones on, scrubbing through the material. It was painful to watch, of course. I forced myself to do it clinically, pausing often to take notes or clip segments. I identified a handful of key moments that would serve my plan. The trigger phrase. I definitely wanted that moment where she whispers, "Party at mine," to her lover on the phone. It was clear, audible, and relatively innocent sounding on its own, just a woman saying a phrase. But in context, it was the linchpin of everything and also the activation of the trap. It had a poetic justice to it. She lit the fuse with those very words. Incriminating dialogue. There were a couple of short exchanges that were perfect for my needs. For instance, her lover outright saying, "Well, my name has no idea, huh?" And her replying, "Stop talking about him. Focus on me." That snippet alone was like a dagger. It implicated them both and underscored her disregard for me. Also, it could be played in mixed company without being too graphic. Just two people talking, albeit intimately. A telltale sound. At one point, the audio caught the sound of a wine bottle opening and them toasting. My wife had giggled and said, "To our little secret." That line gave me chills. It was so succinct, so smug. I clipped it. Text message. Highlights. Alongside the audio, I had the text messages. I decided a visual aid could be powerful. Perhaps I'd display a couple of those texts on a screen, especially the one with the winking "party at mine" invitation. It was short enough to show in one screenshot. I made sure to save that image in a high-resolution format and even practiced projecting it on our TV to see how it would look from a few feet away. Big, bold letters. Her number and Jake's number, or name, as she had him saved under a fake name, I assumed. In the screenshot, it showed just enough of their chat to make the context clear, but nothing graphic. Timing was everything, too. It was time-stamped the afternoon of the day I was away. Hard to dispute that. Video excerpts. Here I was, careful. The video showed them in the act, which I wouldn't show publicly. Instead, I extracted a segment at the very start when they first stumbled into the room. It showed them clothed, well, partially. Her robe was on at least, and kissing. It was a quick clip, just a few seconds, ending right as things would have turned R-rated. From that alone, faces were visible. Anyone who knew us would recognize my wife. And the man, Jake's face was a bit turned, but if you knew him, you could tell. And if not, well, the name in the text would give it away to those who cared. I wove these pieces together into a sort of concise highlights reel of infidelity. It was no more than a minute long in total, with the audio clips playing against either a black screen or overlaying the text screenshot and the short video snippet. It started with her saying "party at mine" on the phone, then cut to the text on screen showing she invited him, then the video snippet of them kissing, then the toast "to our little secret," and finally that bit of dialogue mentioning me. Obliviously, I made sure the transitions were smooth. The final product played like a quiet, devastating montage. Watching it gave me a sick thrill. It was compelling in the worst way. I rehearsed in my mind how I'd present this. Not like some revenge porn sicko, but as a factual revelation. The tone in my head was one of controlled hurt and sarcasm. Something along the lines of, "I'd like to share with you all what's really been happening in my home." Followed by pressing play. In imagining the scene, I kept returning to one idea, doing it at a large family gathering. That would maximize the humiliation and make it impossible for her to brush it off as some private squabble. It would also ensure there were plenty of witnesses to what was revealed, which might come in handy later if she tried to spin the narrative. As it happened, fate handed me the perfect occasion. Our extended family, both hers and mine, were planning a big get-together in a few weeks, a celebration for my in-laws' 40th wedding anniversary. It was to be a grand affair at a local banquet hall, with relatives flying in from out of state, speeches, the whole 9 yards. My wife was deeply involved in organizing it, being the dutiful daughter and party planner, naturally. The irony was exquisite. She was pouring energy into celebrating a long, faithful marriage, all while betraying her own. The event would be large enough and formal enough that a sudden shock would truly make an impact. I circled that date on my calendar. That was when I dropped the bomb. It gave me time to get everything else in order too. In the meanwhile, I had to continue acting normal at home, which was possibly the hardest performance of my life. Knowing what I knew, carrying on as if everything was fine, required constant restraint. There were moments I caught myself looking at her with what must have been a chilling expression, my true feelings almost surfacing. When she'd prattle on about some trivial work drama, I'd have to bite my tongue from saying something like, "Oh? Do they know about your other extracurricular activities?" Instead, I'd just nod and add a non-committal, At night, sometimes she'd even initiate intimacy with me, perhaps out of guilt or to keep up appearances. It took every ounce of willpower to reciprocate even mechanically. I was careful not to reject her outright. That might arouse suspicion. But I can't say I fully succeeded in masking my repulsion. Some nights I feigned exhaustion or an upset stomach to avoid it. If she noticed any cooling on my part, she didn't confront it. Perhaps she was too wrapped up in her double life to sense that I was no longer emotionally present. Meanwhile, I quietly consulted a divorce attorney in the city to avoid any local gossip. I scheduled an appointment during a workday and told my wife I had some delivery runs out of town for the co-op. The attorney was a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa who had seen it all. I laid out the basics. My wife's affair, my evidence. I didn't hand it over, just described it. And my desire to proceed with a divorce that wouldn't leave me holding the short end of the stick. I told her I wanted to minimize financial loss and ideally make my wife's life difficult in the process without doing anything that could backfire legally. Lisa gave a thin, knowing smile. Well, Texas is a no-fault state, but it does allow fault-based grounds like adultery, she said, assuming Texas since we were meeting in Dallas. I'd driven a couple hours to see her. If you can prove adultery, the court may indeed favor you in property division and could bar her from spousal support if it came to that. And any significant marital funds used on the affair, courts can compensate you for that. You've done your homework? I nodded. I had indeed. We discussed strategy. Filing for divorce right after the anniversary event would be ideal. It would be a 1-2 punch, public exposure, then legal action. She cautioned me, though, do not broadcast those recordings publicly in a way that can be seen as distributing intimate content. What you describe sounds fairly tame and more audio-based, which is safer. But be prepared. She might be furious and try to accuse you of invasion of privacy. Technically, what you did could be considered illegal surveillance. I acknowledge that risk. She'd have to admit the content is real and hers to make that claim, though, wouldn't she? I asked. Lisa shrugged. Not necessarily. She could still claim you recorded her illegally regardless of content, but whether the DA would care to prosecute is another story. It rarely happens unless someone made a big deal or you disseminated it widely. This gave me pause. I didn't want legal trouble, but my plan was to play the audio and clips within a private family gathering, not to post it online or anything. And if I framed it as something like this was captured by our smart home accidentally, it might deflect the idea that I was actively bugging her. It was a thin cover, but I decided to use it. Perhaps I'd say our Google Assistant had inexplicably recorded it, as has happened in rare tech glitches as I recalled from news. Regardless, my wife would likely be too stunned and shamed in the moment to screech about legality. I imagined she'd be more concerned with the immediate fallout, faces of disappointed parents, shock of siblings, etc. Lisa also advised me on a crucial point. Start moving some assets and documents now before any confrontation. She meant I should quietly secure any important papers, deeds, titles, account statements, and perhaps shuffle half of our liquid assets into an account only under my name. It's not illegal to take what's already jointly yours, she said, as long as you don't hide it beyond reach. But if you fear she might retaliate by cleaning out accounts or running up credit, better to act first. I took that to heart. Over the next week, I did exactly that. I opened a new bank account solely under my name and transferred half of our savings there. I also directed my paycheck to that new account going forward. Our joint account would still have enough to cover the upcoming bills, but not enough for her to, say, go on a vindictive shopping spree if she figured things out. I also quietly inventoried valuables in the house, photographing them. If she tried to pawn jewelry or move things, I wanted a record. And though it made me feel slightly guilty, I paid a visit to our safe deposit box at the bank where we kept some heirlooms and important documents. I changed the passcode. It was a digital lockbox, since it was in my name primarily, removing her easy access. Petty? Maybe. But I was in war mode, pre-divorce asset protection they call it. Despite all this bustling preparation, outwardly I was just as calm and taciturn as ever. I think my wife thought I was simply busy with work and prepping for the big family event. I even helped her a bit with the slideshow she was making for her parents' anniversary, scanning old photos, arranging them to music. The irony that I was editing two very different presentations at the same time was not lost on me. One was a celebration of loyalty, the other, a condemnation of betrayal. I felt like I was living a double life in parallel to hers, but mine was a righteous one, I believed. By the eve of the anniversary party, I had everything set. The evidence montage was saved on a USB drive and also on my phone. I had a small portable speaker in case the venue's AV system failed me, but I also had coordinated with the DJ to allow me a moment to plug in and play a special audio message. He assumed it was some tribute or song for the couple of honor. In a sense, it was a tribute, just not one anyone would be expecting. I had also rehearsed my speech, if you could call it that. I wanted to keep it short, factual, and dripping with the dry, sharp tone that mirrored how I felt. Sarcasm would be my seasoning, but not so much that it undermined the seriousness. I wrote it down even, though I knew I'd speak from the heart, a cold, hardened heart at this point. Just a few lines. Thank you all for being here. Family is truly important. In that spirit, I'd like to share something personal with all of you. Something that happened in my home recently. I think it's best if you hear it for yourselves. This is what was actually going on behind closed doors. The actually would carry the weight of irony, implying that outward appearances deceived. Then I'd hit play. After the clips, I imagined there'd be stunned silence. Maybe some screams or gasps. And I planned to end with something along the lines of, I'll be filing for divorce first thing Monday. Enjoy the rest of the party, everyone. Perhaps with a raise of a glass to really hammer in the sardonic toast to their little secret. It was cruel. I knew it was an extremely cruel thing to do to someone in front of her family. But then again, what she had done to me was cruel too. And in front of my family, no less, when you consider the betrayal of trust. An audience felt appropriate. Cheaters thrive in shadows. I was going to drag her into the light. The anniversary affair, public reveal. The night of the anniversary arrived crisp and clear. The banquet hall was decorated with golden balloons, white tablecloths, and centerpieces of lilies. My wife's touches were evident as she'd helped coordinate it. Guests mingled, sipping champagne, admiring old photos of the happy couple displayed in the lobby. I moved through the crowd like a ghost with a pleasant mask. I shook hands with cousins, hugged my in-laws, even snapped some photos of them looking joyous and unsuspecting. My wife was flitting about in a lovely blue dress, making sure the caterers were doing their job and that her parents were comfortable. She looked a picture of grace and cheer, even giving me a warm smile and squeezing my hand in passing. I smiled back, stomach churning with anticipation for what I was about to do. Inside the hall, we eventually took our seats for dinner. I ended up at a table with my wife, her parents, her brother, and a few other relatives. Across from me, ironically, sat Jake, yes, the lover himself, with his own oblivious girlfriend, one of my wife's friends, on his arm. This was a twist I hadn't fully expected. I knew Jake was somewhat connected socially, but I didn't realize he was actually invited to this event. It made sense. His girlfriend was a friend of the family, so she'd bring him as a +1. Small-town circles overlap in uncomfortable ways. Seeing him there, so brazen and casual in a suit, laughing at small talk from my father-in-law, made my blood run hot. Neither he nor my wife gave any sign of knowing each other beyond acquaintances. Oscar-worthy performances all around. I wondered if they'd interacted at all since that night. Probably carefully not. His girlfriend was oblivious, doting on him. It was sickening to watch him peck her cheek while I knew exactly where his mouth had been not too long ago. I had to grip my water glass hard to stay composed. This new development only steeled my resolve further. They thought they'd gotten away with it, sitting here under my nose. Not for much longer. After dinner, a few speeches were made in honor of the anniversary couple. My wife went up and delivered a heartfelt tribute to her parents' enduring love, replete with anecdotes of their devotion and sacrifice. The room applauded, some teared up. I clapped politely, but inwardly I was gagging on the hypocrisy. When she returned to her seat, I leaned over and whispered, "Beautiful speech." She beamed and took my hand, perhaps thinking we were sharing a sweet moment. If only she knew. Then came the time for open-floor toasts and any family presentations. I had arranged beforehand with the MC, the DJ-cum-announcer, that I wanted to say a few words, so he called me up. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I stood and walked to the small stage area. In my pocket, the USB drive was ready. On my phone, the file queued up as backup. The room quieted, expecting another quaint story or congratulations for the couple. My in-laws smiled at me from the front table. My wife looked a bit curious. This wasn't on the program, but not alarmed. Jake was mid-drink, his arm around his girlfriend's chair. I took the microphone. My heart was pounding, but I kept my demeanor steady. Time to channel all that dry, sharp wit and anger into coherence. I began, voice calm. Thank you all for being here to celebrate this wonderful occasion. As mother-in-law's name and father-in-law's name mark 40 years of marriage, it's really made me reflect on the idea of family and fidelity. I let that word hang meaningfully for half a second. I saw my wife tilt her head slightly. It's inspiring, truly, I continued, and it reminds us how important trust is in a relationship. I deliberately glanced toward my wife, who was now definitely paying attention. Though probably assuming I was just riffing off her speech's theme, I cleared my throat lightly. In that spirit of openness and honesty, I'd like to share something personal with all of you tonight. My tone remained polite, but there was a razor edge underneath. A few people looked puzzled. My wife fidgeted with her hands in her lap. Jake had stopped smiling. Good, I pressed on. Recently, I encountered a situation in my own home that I feel it's best everyone hear about directly since we're among family. There was now an uneasy silence. People knew something was off-script and unusual. My mother, from another table, furrowed her brow. My wife stood up half an inch as if about to object or question me, but I flashed a quick gesture for her to stay put. She slowly sank back down, confusion and dread starting to mingle on her face. Perhaps an intuition of what was coming, but she couldn't be sure. I gave a thin smile. Consider this a little cautionary tale about what goes on behind closed doors. Let's call it, for lack of a better title, Party at Mine. The instant I said those words, the code words, I saw my wife's face blanch. She now knew something bad was coming. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Jake nearly dropped his glass, sloshing wine. He stared at me like a deer in headlights. I had to resist the urge to smirk. Without missing a beat, I nodded to the AV guy to play the file from the USB. I had already plugged it in earlier. I stepped aside, and through the hall's speakers, my carefully curated clip began to play. First came the sound of a phone ringing twice, then my wife's hushed voice. Hey, yeah, he's gone. Party at Mine. Her voice echoed around the room crystal clear. There was a collective gasp. In an instant, heads swiveled toward her. She looked frozen, as if hit by a stun gun. I caught her father's face, utterly bewildered, then growing horrified as recognition set in that it was his daughter's voice. Her mother brought a hand to her mouth. Then the audio continued to the next part, the clink of a glass and my wife's flirtatious giggle, "To our little secret," followed by a man's low reply, Jake's voice, unmistakable if you knew him, though many didn't, saying, "My name has no idea." Huh? And then my wife's voice with a dripping, intimate tone. "Shh, stop talking about him. Focus on me." Murmurs swelled in the audience. Some at our table clearly recognized Jake's voice, or at least realized it was a man who wasn't me. Jake's girlfriend had turned to him with a look of absolute shock and revulsion, connecting the dots with a jolt. "Jake!" she yelped, half standing. Jake sputtered. "This isn't, I can explain." But he didn't move. He looked cornered. The audio clip wasn't done. Next, I had overlaid the incriminating text message exchange on the projector screen. I'd arranged that with the AV tech as well. Up on the big screen flashed an image of the phone chat. my wife's number, and a contact Jake auto shop with that message. It's finally happening. Party at mine? Don't forget the wine. And his reply, on my way, can't wait. The timestamps clearly from the date I was away. A chorus of astonished and dismayed noises rippled through the crowd. Someone uttered, "Oh my God." Over that visual, the final audio played. The brief muffled video snippets sound. The rustling and a faint moan that wasn't too explicit but enough to imply physical intimacy, ending with my wife's breathy whisper of, my name mixed with has no idea again. I had artfully echoed that line as the conclusion. Then I stopped the playback. The hall was dead silent except for the intermittent crackle of the speaker. I stepped back to the mic amid the stunned silence. In front of me, my wife sat as if paralyzed, her face drained of color, eyes glistening with tears that hadn't yet fallen. She was shaking her head slightly, mouth opening and closing without words. Her parents were staring at her, then at me, then at her, in utter disbelief and embarrassment. Jake's girlfriend had slapped him. I'd missed the moment but saw the aftermath. Jake rubbing his cheek, her in tears. Some of my wife's friends were holding hands over their mouths, looking from her to Jake to me like this was some nightmare they'd wake up from. I felt an intense clarity and calm as I spoke my final piece. So, I addressed the room with an eerily even tone. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what was actually going on inside our home while I was away. I figured you all deserved to know. I turned specifically to my in-laws, adopting a tone of feigned apology. I'm sorry to have to share this on your special night, but I believe transparency is important in a family. The sarcasm under the polite phrasing was razor sharp, and they felt it. My father-in-law's face hardened with a mix of anger and sorrow. Now I looked at my wife directly. She flinched as if I'd struck her. I couldn't help a slight curl of my lip. As for us, I said quietly, though everyone could hear in the pin-drop silence, I'll be initiating divorce proceedings on Monday. Strategically. I added that last word with a cold smile that only she could truly appreciate, given we'd once talked about how divorces can be amicable or strategic. This one would be the latter. I've already consulted a lawyer, dear, I said in a lower voice, not needing the mic, but it carried anyway. You'll be hearing from them very soon. At this point, the silence broke into chaos. My wife burst into tears. Not gentle, remorseful tears, but the panicked sobs of someone whose world just disintegrated in public. She stood, wobbling on her heels, reaching out toward me. Please, wait, let's talk, she cried. I stepped back, holding up a hand as if to ward off a stranger. We have nothing to talk about right now, I said icily. Her mother stood up, putting a hand on her shoulder, both to comfort and restrain her. Her father was glaring daggers at Jake, who was now slinking toward the exit as his own girlfriend berated him loudly, years of small-town propriety evaporating in an instant of fury. A couple of other men, I think one was my wife's cousin, looked ready to grab Jake and do something, but he managed to slip out, nearly tripping over the threshold, with the girlfriend shouting, "Coward!" after him. People started either rushing to my in-laws or my wife, or, conversely, trying to shrink back in embarrassment as if they'd witnessed something obscene, which, frankly, they had. The whole event was effectively ruined, but that was collateral damage to me. The focus was exactly where I wanted it, on my wife's infidelity exposed under the brightest lights. In the midst of the commotion, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. It was my own mother, looking at me with concern, and was that a hint of pride? It's hard to say. She simply said, "Come on, son, let's step outside for a minute." I allowed myself to be guided out of the limelight as a cluster of her family and mine swarmed around my wife and her parents. I caught snippets as I left. How could you? What the hell were you thinking? We'll figure this out, but not here. That last from her brother, trying to manage the situation. The door closed behind me and I walked out into the cool night air. I realized I was shaking, not with regret or fear, but with the dissipating adrenaline. It was done. The truth was out. And I had been the one to fling it onto the table like a gauntlet. Outside, the stars were shining, oblivious to human dramas. I leaned against the wall of the building, loosening my tie, and exhaled a long breath I felt I'd been holding for months. My mother stood quietly beside me, knowing I'd speak if I wanted. After a moment, I just said, "I'm okay. It had to be done." She nodded sadly, patting my back. She didn't offer platitudes or scold me for the dramatic display. She understood our family's tendency for methodical decisions. I got it from her side, after all. A few minutes later, the doors opened and out came my wife. No, ex-wife-to-be, flanked by her parents. Her eyes were red, makeup streaked, expression one of abject despair. I straightened up as they approached. Her father's face was like stone. Her mother wouldn't meet my eyes, out of shame or anger or both. My wife stepped toward me, daring to reach out a hand. "Please, can we talk alone?" she whispered, voice trembling. I stared at her hand like it was something diseased. "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of everyone," I replied evenly. "I have no more secrets and neither should you." She winced at that. "I'm so sorry," she began, tears flowing anew. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I cut her off with a cold laugh. "Didn't mean anything. Months of planning and sneaking, it seems. Hotel receipts, wine, candles. That looked like a lot of effort for nothing." I could see her parents absorbing that detail. They hadn't even known about hotels in months. My reveal covered one incident, but I'd just hinted it was a longer affair. Her father's jaw tightened further. My wife tried again. "I'll do anything, anything to make it up, please. Don't do this, not like this." I replied quietly, "The time for doing anything passed when you decided to say party at mine. This is exactly like this because of that." It was perhaps a clunky sentence, but I was beyond caring for eloquence with her. I added, "You dug your grave. Now lie in it." My tone was so measured it made her sob harder. Her mother put an arm around her, shooting me a pleading look as if to say, "Enough, we get it." I turned to her parents directly. "I apologize that your celebration ended this way, but I thought you, of all people, deserved honesty tonight." My father-in-law responded after a heavy pause. We will talk later. This is family matter." I smirked subtly. "Yes, a family matter. Your daughter is no longer my family as far as I'm concerned." That was possibly more cruel than needed, and her mother gasped softly. But her father just nodded grimly. He understood betrayal on a principle level, I think. "We won't make a scene further. We'll take her home," he said. I simply replied, "Do as you like. I'll have divorce papers drawn up soon. We can communicate through lawyers." My wife cried out, "No, please, and tried to approach me again. This time, my own dad, who had come out at some point, stepped between us. "I think it's best you go with your folks now," he told her, not unkindly but firmly. She looked at him, perhaps remembering he'd been like a second father to her for years, and crumpled into quiet sobs. With that, her parents led her away to their car. She glanced back at me once, anguish in her eyes. I felt a pang somewhere deep, an echo of the love I once had for her, but it was quickly smothered by the image of her and Jake sneaking up our stairs. I steeled myself and did not return the look. The hall inside was dissolving into awkward disbandment. The party was well and truly over, in more ways than one. I didn't go back in. I let others handle the cleanup and comforting. A few relatives came by to offer me half-hearted pats on the shoulder or, "I'm so sorry, man." I acknowledged but wasn't up for conversation. I just wanted to get out of there. As I walked to my car, parked a bit away under a street lamp, I realized my hands were steady. I'd just upended my entire life in spectacular fashion, yet I felt steady. Legally clean, emotionally in control, that's what I promised myself, and I had delivered. I had not raised my voice, not thrown a single punch. I had simply laid out the truth and watched it scorch the earth under her feet, and I was okay with that. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, closing my eyes. The image of her devastated face lingered. For a brief second, I felt something like pity. But then I remembered. She wasn't crying out of love lost, she was crying because she got caught, and because her comfortable life just shattered. If I hadn't caught her, she'd likely be laughing in Jake's arms the next chance she got. That thought hardened me again. No, she earned this outcome. I drove away from the venue, windows down, the night air cool on my face. One battle was over. The next, the legal one, was about to begin, and I was well prepared for it. Divorce, strategically true to my word, first thing Monday morning my lawyer filed the divorce petition, citing adultery as the grounds. In our state, that was legally significant. It meant I was formally accusing her of fault, which set the stage for settlement talks heavily skewed in my favor. The discovery phase of the divorce process would have been intriguing had it not been so straightforward. I already possessed the damning evidence, so there was little more I needed to discover. If anything, her side might try to scrape together something against me, but there was nothing. I was as clean as a whistle. No affairs, no financial shenanigans, no cruelty or neglect. Boringly blameless. My attorney actually remarked that it was refreshing to have a client who hadn't, say, secretly blown the retirement funds on gambling or something. In the initial weeks, my wife, or rather, ex-wife, as I'll call her now for clarity, though the divorce wasn't final yet, oscillated between despair and anger. She left the house to live with her parents temporarily, which was a relief. I changed the locks the day after the reveal, not legally required perhaps, it was still jointly owned, but she didn't attempt to come back except once to pick up clothes. I wasn't home. I let that happen to avoid drama. I stayed in the house, alone, which was better for my frame of mind. She blew up my phone with texts and calls initially. Apologies, begging, then anger calling me heartless for humiliating her, then swinging back to pleas for forgiveness. I ignored most and responded only once with a curt message. Communicate through my lawyer. Do not contact me directly. When she persisted the next day with a long email, I replied just with my lawyer's contact info and nothing else. I had gone emotionally no contact in record time. In truth, it wasn't easy. Each message from her stirred up a hornet's nest of feelings. But I reread them under the cold lens of her actions and found it remarkably easy to delete them after. Legally, things proceeded in a by-the-book manner. Since I filed on fault grounds, she initially panicked and lawyered up too. Her first attorney tried a common tactic. Threatened to contest everything to force a no-fault negotiation. Essentially, he implied they might argue the recordings were inadmissible or that I had coerced a confession by public shaming, a spurious notion. My lawyer Lisa was unperturbed. In our response, we basically said, go ahead, contest it. We attached copies of some evidence we'd happily present, notably the text messages and a written transcript of some audio. We kept the actual intimate audio off the official record for decency, but the transcript of them acknowledging the affair was enough. Faced with that, her side went nearly silent. There's not much defense when confronted with clear and convincing evidence of adultery, as the standard goes. Instead, the battle moved to the settlement table for asset division. And here's where my strategic legal precision truly paid off. I had, as mentioned, already moved half our liquid assets to safety. The remainder, I was open to splitting fairly, but I also made clear I'd seek a disproportionate share of marital property due to her fault. In Texas, where we indeed were, that was confirmed by law context, a judge can award a larger share to the wronged spouse. So when negotiating, I basically said, if we take this to court, I'll ask for 70% of assets and possibly get it. Or you agree now to 60-40 and save everyone the hassle. Given her shame and desire to not drag this out in public court anymore, she caved to that. One crucial element was alimony, spousal support. Normally, in a long marriage, she might have tried to claim some support, but we were relatively young and both employed. Plus, adultery gave me grounds to argue she should get nothing there. Indeed, I cited a relevant snippet via my lawyer. Her adultery could reduce or eliminate her right to spousal support. She didn't contest that. In fact, her lawyer privately admitted that they'd never get alimony past a judge given the circumstances. So she waived any claim to it in writing. That was a win. I'd not have to pay her a dime going forward once the split was done. We had no kids, thankfully, so no custody issues. If we had, that could have been messy, but that wasn't applicable. Only thing akin to custody was who keeps the house and the dog. We had a golden retriever named Buddy. And I got Buddy, of course. She didn't even fight me on that, perhaps knowing I'd bring up how often she left the poor dog alone to meet Jake. I made sure to address one more angle: moral victory in paperwork. I wanted it written in the settlement that infidelity had occurred and she was at fault. She resisted that at first, saying it would ruin her reputation if it leaked. But in Texas, filings can be public anyway, and I had already filed with adultery as cause, so it was somewhat moot. Still, her lawyer bargained to keep some phrasing neutral in the final decree in exchange for conceding more financial share to me. I allowed a little face-saving language in the final decree like irreconcilable differences, but with a private side agreement acknowledging the adultery for our records, in case of any future disputes. Honestly, I didn't care too much if the final stamp was no fault, as long as I got what I wanted. The world, at least our world, already knew what she did. I didn't need the court decree to advertise it further. Throughout these dealings, I remained calm and businesslike. We did most via lawyers, but there were a couple of sessions where we all sat at a conference table to hash out details. She couldn't look me in the eye for the most part. When she did, her eyes were hollow, pleading silently. I ignored it. I addressed her lawyer or mine, not her, as if she wasn't there. At one point, she directly said, "I know you hate me, but I'm sorry. I messed up so bad." I didn't respond to the apology because Lisa smoothly redirected the conversation to the next item, the division of our retirement accounts. It was a bit awkward, but effective in shutting down personal talk. I did, however, speak up when her lawyer gingerly brought up that she would like to keep a particular piece of jewelry that was her grandmother's, technically marital property since it was given to her during marriage, but sentimental to her. I said flatly, "That's fine. In exchange, I keep the car." It was our second car, which she usually used. Higher value than the jewelry, but I didn't care for the car so much as making a point that nothing comes free anymore. She agreed. These little negotiations all stacked up in my favor. I essentially walked out of the marriage with the house, the car, 60% of all accounts, my pension untouched, no debt. We agreed each keeps debt they incurred. She had some credit card debt likely from spending on the affair, which I flagged as marital waste to negotiate. I shouldn't have to pay, and I didn't. She even had to reimburse half of the hefty fee I paid the PI. Oh yes, I hired one for a short stint after separation just to track if she met Jake. To see if affair was continuing. It wasn't. They broke it off amid the chaos, unsurprisingly. This was a bit spiteful, but I included the PI cost in marital expenses to be split. My lawyer chuckled at that, calling it a rare ask. But hey, she agreed just to get things over with. Perhaps the most gratifying part was one I didn't trumpet but savored quietly. In gathering financial records for the divorce, I highlighted certain charges of hers that were clearly affair-related. The hotel, some lavish restaurant bills, on days I was out, etc. We labeled those as dissipation of marital assets. In negotiations, I essentially said, because you spent X dollars of our funds on your affair, I'm entitled to X more from our asset division to compensate. Legally sound, and she didn't have much ground to fight it. So I indeed got a roughly $5,000 credit in the split for that wasted money. It wasn't so much the money as the principle. She paid, literally, for her misdeeds. All in all, within a few months, we had a settlement signed. The divorce judge approved it with a cursory glance. These things are mostly paperwork if both parties agree. On a cool morning in early spring, I walked out of the courthouse with my final decree. I was officially divorced, free, and relatively unscathed in terms of life assets. I lost a wife, but, as the saying goes, better to have loved and lost than to live with a lying cheater bleeding you slowly. My ex-wife moved out of town soon after. The social fallout was too much for her to stay locally, I think. She went to live with a cousin in another state to start fresh. Good riddance. Jake? Well, Jake didn't last long at the auto shop. Word got around, small towns after all. People didn't trust a mechanic who'd do something like that to a customer's marriage, I guess. He left town too, tail between legs. His relationship was obviously over. The girlfriend he had was apparently the one who spread a lot of the gossip that made him unemployable locally. Poetic justice there. I kept a distant eye on these things through the grapevine, but didn't show any outward interest. In public, I just went about my life, perhaps a bit more withdrawn, but also strangely lighter. One day, about a month after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter in the mail from my ex-wife. Not a legal one, a personal one. I hesitated, then opened it. It was handwritten, several pages of heartfelt apology, reflection, and update on her life. She said she was in therapy, confronting her issues, and that she regretted everything and would regret it forever. She said I had been a good husband and didn't deserve what she did. She didn't beg reconciliation. She knew that ship was at the bottom of the ocean. But she hoped one day I'd forgive her for my own peace. It was a well-written letter, I'll grant. I read it all, set it down, and pondered if I felt any forgiveness. I searched myself and only found a kind of emptiness where she was concerned. Not rage anymore, not love, just a void. Maybe that was peace of a sort. I didn't reply. I filed the letter away with the divorce papers and went to play fetch with Buddy in the yard. Final justice. The legal war was over, but in my mind, one item remained on the revenge agenda. Jake. The weasel had slunk away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't quite paid a direct price from me yet. Sure, his life was impacted, lost job, lost girlfriend, public shame, but those were almost side effects. I had a more pointed message in mind for him. Something to make him feel some of the pain and fear he had a hand in causing. It wasn't hard to track him down. Before he quit the auto shop, I had learned he moved to an apartment on the edge of town. No doubt after his girlfriend kicked him out. After he left, rumors said he was bartending at a dive bar in the next county. A little discreet inquiry confirmed it. A buddy of mine who remained unaware of my deeper machinations mentioned having seen Jake tending bar at a place off the highway. That was enough. Now, I wasn't about to do anything reckless myself. Remember, legally clean was my mantra. But hiring someone? That added a layer of insulation. I didn't want to do anything extreme. I'm not a murderer or even someone who'd want to cause permanent injury. But a lesson, a scare, a small dose of pain? That seemed fitting. My mind kept going back to a particular idea. Pepper spray. It's nasty but non-lethal. It incapacitates and punishes without lasting damage. And importantly, it's an action one could attribute to random crime rather than to me, if done right. How to arrange it without a trail? I wasn't exactly practiced in underworld dealings. Yet sometimes things fall into place. One night, I was at a bar, not Jake's, a better one, and struck up a conversation with a guy I vaguely knew from the co-op's extended circles. He was complaining about money problems, how he'd do any odd job for cash. Light bulb moment. I steered the talk, jokingly at first, about wild, odd jobs. Eventually, half in jest, I said, I might have a little job for you, but it's a weird one. He was drunk enough to laugh and say, shoot, I'll do anything not outright illegal. I said, define outright illegal. We chuckled. A day later, I met him sober and pitched it plainly. I'll give you $500 to drive to this bar, wait for a guy named Jake to step out, and hit him with pepper spray. Then leave. That's it. I expected him to balk. But $500 for basically a simple assault, a misdemeanor if caught, which was unlikely. He looked at me, whistled low, and said, must really hate this dude. I just replied, he's earned it. You in? The guy shrugged and nodded. Wear a mask, hat, whatever, I advised. Don't let him see you coming. Yell something random like, this is for messing with the wrong woman to confuse him, then spray and scram. The guy found it more and more amusing. Hell, I'll do it with pleasure. Always wanted to use one of those. I gave him half up front, half after. No written anything, just cash. If he ended up chickening out, fine. But I had a sense he'd do it. And he did. 2 weeks later, I got a text from a number I didn't save. His burner, I suppose. The package was delivered. That was our code. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and met him later to hand over the rest of the cash. He said Jake went down like a sack of potatoes, crying like a baby, clawing at his eyes. My hired hand was gone before anyone could react. Apparently, a couple of bar patrons saw a masked figure sprint to a car and peel out. Jake was left rolling on the pavement until someone poured milk on his face for the burn and called an ambulance. No lasting harm except maybe to his pride and comfort for a few days. The police report, oh yes, I saw a small news blurb about an unknown assailant pepper-spraying local man, suggested it might have been a robbery attempt or personal retaliation. Jake reportedly told cops he had no idea who or why someone did it. I'm sure he might have suspected it was connected to his misdeeds, but he had no proof. And he couldn't exactly point to me. I was nowhere near. I had an airtight alibi even. I was at a public town council meeting that evening, visible and chatting with folks, ensuring to shake hands with a few prominent people so they'd remember I was there. When I read that news snippet, I allowed myself a deep, satisfied sigh. Poetic justice delivered with no link back to me. Party's over, Jake. Epilogue. In the months that followed, life settled into a new normal. I remained in our house, now my house, got used to solitary routines, and gradually rejoined the social scene without the invisible weight of marital deceit on my back. People in town were polite. Some were awkward around me at first, but I eased it by behaving as if I was perfectly fine, even if I wasn't at first. Small town memory is long, but gossip moves on. A year later, some other scandal occupied the Whisper Mill, and I was mostly old news. Fine by me. I threw myself into work at the co-op, even got a promotion to a managerial role. The focus and the hours filled what could have been a void. At home, Buddy the dog was my loyal companion and therapist of sorts. Always there with a wagging tail and no lies to tell. Trust is a precious thing. A dog's trust is simple and pure. That I could handle. One evening, I was cleaning out old files and I found the USB drive with the Party at Mine clips. I hadn't looked at or listened to it since the divorce. I pondered if I should erase it for closure. Ultimately, I decided to toss it into the fireplace and watch it melt in a little bonfire of memory. I don't need it anymore, I thought. Its purpose was served. I did keep one thing, a printed copy of that infamous text conversation. It's filed away, not out of spite, but as a personal reminder. It reminds me to trust my instincts, to value my own worth, and to never ignore the signs of betrayal again. It also, oddly, reminds me that I'm capable of standing up for myself in spectacular fashion when pushed to the edge. That's a strange thing to take pride in, I suppose, but I do. I handled it my way, a reserved, calculating man's way. No screaming matches in the street, no physical abuse. I let the truth and the law do the damage for me. And a little pepper spray, for flair. People might ask, was it worth it? Couldn't I have ended the marriage quietly and moved on without the drama? Perhaps. But something in me needed that catharsis, that grand reveal. It wasn't just for me, but for the principle of it. Cheaters often get away with their lies, slinking off into new lives with minimal repercussions. I wanted to make sure in this case at least there was a reckoning. And there was. I think back to the timid man I might have been if I hadn't taken this path. Perhaps I would have confronted her privately, she'd cry and apologize, and maybe I'd stupidly forgive and spend years in a miserable half-life of distrust. We might have fought quietly, split assets 50-50, and she'd still play the victim to some. I'd internalize the pain and carry it like a poison. That wasn't acceptable to me. Instead, I feel cleansed. She was exposed, I was vindicated, and I came out whole. There's a certain dry justice in it all. In the end, I don't consider myself a vengeful person by nature. Life is too short to dwell in hatred. But I do believe in consequences. My ex-wife faced hers, Jake faced his, and I carried on, legally clean and emotionally in control, just as I set out to. My story became a bit of a local legend, cautionary for some, entertaining for others. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I'd add, serve it with a side of tech savvy and a straight face, and you can feast quite well. As I close the book on this chapter of my life, I occasionally raise a glass of whiskey on a quiet night and think to myself with a touch of wry humor. Here's to our little secret. But of course, it's not a secret anymore. The party's over. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.